Good morning. My name is Tom Snow, and on behalf of the faculty, staff, and students here at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College, I welcome you and thank you for joining us at today's event. The Institute's mission is to engage, educate, and empower citizens of all ages to actively participate in the civic and political life of their communities and to strengthen democracy. The Institute is nonpartisan and does not endorse political issues or candidates. Before we begin this morning's program, I'd like to quickly cover a couple housekeeping items. Please turn off any cell phones or other devices that make noise. And following the Congressman's remarks, we'll have a brief question and answer period. Congressman Darrell Issa represents the people of California's 49th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it's a seat he's held since 2001. A leader in California grassroots politics, Representative Issa has been a champion to the cause of smart, efficient government, consistently pushing legislation to balance the federal budget and promote transparency. Issa is currently a member of the House Judiciary Committee and the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, where he serves as chairman. Prior to these appointments, he also served on many other committees, including the Small Business Committee. The holder of 37 patents of his own, Congressman Issa has been vigilant about protecting intellectual property rights and promoting innovation and creativity. Before his time in Congress, Issa was CEO of California-based Directed Electronics, a company he built to become the nation's largest manufacturer of vehicle anti-theft devices. He has been named Entrepreneur of the Year and Chairman of the Consumer Electronics Association. Congressman Issa's willingness and ability to lead can be attributed to his time in the U.S. Army. After serving as an enlisted man for 2 years, he received an ROTC scholarship. Upon graduation, he was commissioned as an Army officer, ultimately obtaining the rank of captain. Evaluations from superiors included high praise, with phrases like promote ahead of contemporaries and unlimited potential. Representative Issa will frame today's discussion around President Obama's State of the Union address and other current affairs, including the economy, job creation, and the use of technology. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Darrell Issa.
Now, I've got a prepared speech, and I'm mostly not going to use it. I would hope to speak to the front row, second row, and then, you really did mix up the students, unless you're a student. Okay. But I came here because it's really for the students' generation that we need to shape the debate in 2016 differently than we have over the last several decades. And the question of transparency and the questions of accountability in government are bantered about in Washington all the time. But the truth is, not just this administration, which promised to be the most transparent in American history, but every presidency has become larger, less transparent, harder to follow. Some decades ago, the Freedom of Information Act opened up what's called a FOIA discovery. And the newspapers, the ACLU and others rushed in to get that information. What they've discovered is systematically it has become an expensive process to try to get a limited amount of information, usually highly redacted. As Americans, you deserve, in this day and age, to be able to Google search your government the way you Google search the rest of the internet. That's not possible today, nor is it likely to become possible until we change how government builds its databases, how it regulates them, and how it interprets what you have a right to. Currently, government assumes that everything is essentially theirs until they determine that you have a need to know it and a limited right to a limited part of it. I'm not saying for a moment that I want to have yours or my social security numbers or personal information on the internet. Just the opposite. I've been fighting in the last few months against a healthcare.gov website that opened up your personal information and access to the IRS because it was poorly built, ill-conceived and launched before the security systems were in place. What I'm talking about, though, is if you're going to have, at the national level, any semblance of the kind of control that people in New Hampshire have of their government here, you have to have a different system. Now, people come to New Hampshire, as all of you in this room know, generally to run for president or to explore running for president. I've said very clearly, I came here hoping to change the debate for those who do run for president. Asking New Hampshireans, is that the right way to say it, by the way? Anything but hamsters, right? But asking you to grill and drill and interrogate presidential candidates on a subject that previously they haven't been held accountable for. Are you running for president to grow the presidency, or are you running for president to be a servant of the American people and to properly execute the laws in place? It's not just Barack Obama who is expanding government by executive order. This has been a practice for virtually everybody in the room I just left, with the possible exception of Dwight David Eisenhower. Because presidents have, in fact, viewed executive orders as ways to do what they couldn't get legislatures to do. This president is simply more honest about it. If we're going to have a republic that is good to you, we have to fix Social Security. We have to fix Medicare. We have to fix many of the entitlement programs. We also have to fix how we deliver basic services and basic obligations. The U.S. military today is about a $600 billion enterprise. But on September 11, 2012, they had no plan for the entire continent of Africa when our consulate was attacked in Benghazi. Many people have heard about Secretary Clinton's failure to react and failure to be prepared, and I think the record is pretty clear on that. But the record is even more clear that DoD officials said under oath they had no contingent plan. Even after our embassy wall was scaled in Cairo, Egypt, they did not go on high alert. The business of defending our nation is the first obligation of the next president. Asked, and every president will answer that question, of course that's my first obligation. Then the next question is, how will you do it on less money, but do it better? How will you do it at a time in which the so-called Arab Spring is making every country a different relation to the United States and a different relation to our allies? The reason we formed the State Department early in our democracy was we knew that promoting commerce for American business was critical. Do presidents get up and think about that? Do they come with a plan to promote our relationship around the world? Or is it simply part of the obligation that they get to after they expand the Americans with Disability Act, OSHA, EPA, the Affordable Care Act, and many other programs that are more popular back home? I believe that this president has given us a rare opportunity. He's given your generation a rare opportunity. The opportunity to see that the federal government is simply too big. It's not about whether or not Americans want and deserve certain services from their government. It's a question of whether or not the services that are essential and required by the federal government are being delivered efficiently and effectively. There's several seniors in this room. Ask any senior whether Medicare delivers them money for health care. They'll say yes. Then the question is it well organized? Is it easy to use? And, oh, by the way, do you believe that it has waste? And you'll get another, yes, it has a lot of waste, and no, it's not easy to use. And yes, my health care is not getting easier, it's getting harder. When Medicare was conceived, it cost less than 1/8 what it cost in constant dollars compared to its estimate. The healthcare rollout is already almost double what it was estimated to cost. And for those of you in the front row, you just have to write down $1 trillion and realize how many zeros are there. That's about what the increase in just 2 months after the launch of healthcare.gov has been. So what is the debate? The debate is what you ask presidential candidates. Are you in fact going to execute the office, or are you going to expand the office? Are you going to look to Congress as a piggy bank that once a year you go to, you get a pot of money, and then you try not to answer their questions afterwards? My reason for coming here is I've had 5 years, happens to be under this president, but 13 years in Congress, including the entire term of George W. Bush, to see that it's not just an imperial presidency, it's an imperial bureaucracy, it's an imperial cabinet. Once people have the power in Washington of executive authority, they seldom want much more to do with Congress than to make their reports and leave. Now, since you're college students here, I'm going to ask you to seriously considering reading Robert Gates's book, Duty, because he gives you rare insight into being there under 2 presidents for the most important job that a president's required to do, and that is to be the chief executive, the commander-in-chief of our military. And he makes it very clear that one didn't do it as well as he would have liked, and the other didn't seem to even like the people who did it for America. And I think that goes back to this question: what do you really want from your federal government? What do you really need from your federal government? What would you rather have 400 legislators here in New Hampshire look at and have responsibility for? And what would you like to have the money back to do yourself? Those questions are the questions of the real reform that the next generation must deal with. When I was young, I never envisioned being somebody who would come as a member of Congress, a chairman of a committee, and start talking in terms of protecting a Constitution that's in peril. But I think for all of us now, we do have a Constitution in peril. The original intent of the Constitution was that the chief executive, the president, would be restrained, and restrained to a level that he or she could never be similar to King George or any of the other sovereigns that we had dealt with. That in fact, governors and mayors would have greater authority in many ways than presidents. The reason the 10th Amendment clearly makes it undeniable that states have all the authority except for those explicitly given to the federal government. But it's not about whether it's federal or state that I really want you to concentrate on. It's a question of what is executive power and why executive power is now out of balance. As we continue to expand the power of the executive branch under Republicans who think they have answers for better government and they introduce one program after another, or Democrats who want to expand government and introduce or take over other programs, including No Child Left Behind, including, quite frankly, the student aid programs that are now backed by taxpayers and completely run by the federal government, that have served only to increase the cost of education while leaving you with greater and greater debt as a result. Those programs and more are part of what the executive branch now controls. The House has very little authority. The Senate has very little authority over it. Understand that wasn't the original intent. The intent was that the first branch of government, the House and the Senate, would have the vast majority of authority and the transparency that comes with the purse strings. All of you saw the government shutdown. All of you, I'm sure, were, amazed that adults in Washington could be so foolish as to reach that point. The amazing thing is that we haven't shut down the government 100 times in order to shut down programs that Congress doesn't want to fund and the president doesn't want to live behind. It's clear that funding, the purse strings, are no longer how the House or the Senate are going to rein in government. So what I would say to you is real transparency, data systems that you can look at, that the inspector generals can look at, that Congress can look at, that show you where the real expenditures, the waste and abuse in government are. Not just by a president who often doesn't know what those figures are, but by bureaucrats going down to somebody that may be in a regional office in Cincinnati asking whether or not your application for tax-exempt status is going to be granted or not. It has taken months to find out that Lois Lerner and people in Washington were clearly responsible for torturing and delaying IRS applications by groups that the president didn't like or agree with, when it should have taken minutes to quickly figure out where the stops came. So for your generation, for the generation that assumes that everything will be instantly answered on your cell phone, the question is, why when you do a Google search do you get no real information about your government or its spending? And the answer is, it hasn't been made available to you. It hasn't been available even to Congress. That's the change that I want to see. Now, in the introduction they said I would take a short group of questions. The fact is, until they give me the hook, I'd love to take your questions because I do a much better job of answering questions than, candidly, I do of making speeches. Are you a student? I gotta take a student first.
Well, not here.
Where do you study?
Well, I'm a student of LaRouche. I'm with LaRouche PAC. And look, I just wanted to present a few things. One, that
Do you have a question?
Yeah, that you obviously know the gross abuses of power in this presidency, probably better than any member of Congress, given where you sit. And in that context, I think there's many reasons that you would push for an impeachment of Obama. Either Fast and Furious or Benghazi or any number of these scandals, the IRS. I mean, you could probably
Let me answer that question, because it's a good question.
Hold on, but I think there's nothing more pressing than the economic collapse and the threat of thermonuclear war, as we're seeing immediately before us. So LaRouche is saying 10 to 12 congressmen coming together on impeachment by midweek would totally change this direction of
Let me answer your question.
Pushing for war.
And, you know, did you see the question there? Because I did. The question is, should we impeach the president? Should we impeach Eric Holder?
No, are you?
And I'm going to phrase the question. And let me do this because it's important. And I deal with questions like this every day. And they're good questions. The President of the United States, in Fast and Furious, through the Justice Department, through Eric Holder, suggested just that. When we said we wanted to know, we wanted to see the papers of who was responsible for perpetrating a lie on the American people, saying that in Fast and Furious they didn't walk guns that led to Brian Terry being killed in Arizona. Their answer was, we don't have to answer you. You have the tool of impeachment, and they suggested exactly that, rather than deliver us the documents that would show who knew about the lie, who was part of covering it up. And by the way, most of those people are lawyers. And for knowingly lying to Congress and for a conspiracy to cover up, generally you get disbarred. We were denied those answers, and to today we've been denied those answers. But a U.S. judge in the District of Columbia, rightfully so, looked at our brief related to this case, looked at our references to Richard Milhouse Nixon and his reluctance to turn over his tapes, and the ultimate decision that he had to do it, that the executive branch has to be held accountable in investigations, not just in impeachment, to discovery. And we will get the documents related to that in time. It's still going through a process. But the question is one I'd like to answer beyond impeachment. Impeachment, like closing down the government, is a radical step. It's one that disrupts our democracy, and it is a hammer that should be used only when the American people have lost faith in the chief executive. But then the question is, how do we develop tools in which Congress really can have scalpels to cut away at waste, to open up and create transparency so that you know what your government's doing, so that your votes count because your votes are educated. Votes don't really count because you cast them. They count when you cast them with the information necessary to make the right decision. That's true in anything you do in life. So one of the things that the Judiciary Committee is doing, and I know that Lyndon LaRouche's people won't be thrilled with the speed of it, but we are putting together, and in the days to come, you're going to see a series of proposals for standing to give the House of Representatives and the Senate individually the standing to go to the court on executive orders that we believe do not faithfully execute the laws already passed, on rules and rulemaking processes that are not compliant with the law. Because if you're going to have the Constitution in a complex, large government be enforced, it's not going to be by impeaching somebody for 1, 100, or 1,000 violations. It's going to be slapping down those excesses so that what is passed into law is executed faithfully by not just this president, but by every president. This president happens to have a domestic social agenda primarily. The next president may have an agenda of wandering around the world on things beyond the scope that Congress wants to give. We need to have the tools. The tools are scalpels. It doesn't mean that impeachment is off the table. Of course, it is never off the table. But it can't be on the table simply based on an arrogant president who writes rules and says, tell me what's wrong with them. Our answer is, we'd like to be quickly in court to make it very, very clear through the third body, through the judiciary, that it's not just our opinion that he's not faithfully executing, but in fact, lifetime appointment judges whose job it is to weigh in the balance his constitutional questions. Question up front. Yes, sir.
You've been very vocal about your opinion as to what federal government should do. What do you
And
think,
shouldn't?
or what it shouldn't do? What do you believe is the purpose of federal government in a citizen's life?
You know, those inalienable rights that you have, it's our job to protect them. After that, they are very limited to statutory decisions consistent with the Constitution that the American people through their representatives have given the federal, the state, and the local governments. That's what's wonderful about our Constitution, is it doesn't say what we shall do, it mostly says what we shall not do. Yes, we have an obligation to protect against enemies, both foreign and domestic. We have an opportunity to build post roads and post offices, to establish for a limited period of time exclusivities under patents, copyrights, and trademarks. Those are not mandates, by the way, those are opportunities. We have the authority to do it. We have an obligation to, at a national level, determine bankruptcy. Because some folks in Connecticut, as I understand, decided that they weren't going to pay their war debts, and we decided that maybe the federal government should control the bankruptcy questions. But these are very small powers, and all of you that have ever carried a pocket Constitution realize how short it is even after 27 amendments. So the answer is very little. And that's my point of being here today. I want us to do very little federally, but do it well. Not do a great deal and forget the important requirements that we have. You know, we are in a global war that's going on every day. Some people will mention Al-Qaeda and talk about terrorism. How about the hundreds of thousands of attacks every hour coming to our internet by foreign entities, often inside military bases in China and Russia and other places? Those are real attacks. They're attacks on commerce that you depend on. So government has an obligation there because no one else can do it. You can't protect the internet from your basement. We need to protect it at a national and international level. So there are some new things that need to happen that are consistent with the Constitution, but for the most part, what our founding fathers gave us as a responsibility, those are the only responsibilities we really truly have, unless you really want to change the Constitution. And if you do, bring it on. But for the most part, the Constitution has been changed little and needs to be changed little. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. As a Marine veteran and a participant in Operation Jukebox Lotus in response to the 2012 Benghazi attack, I know I speak for myself and my fellow Marines. We'd like to know exactly what happened and what's being done about it.
Well, it's my goal to get that, and I first of all thank you for your service. I noticed you have the entire continent of Africa on your sweatshirt. Commandant Amos, Jim Amos, reacted to September 11th when no other service did. And before I talk about what we're doing, the Commandant pulled together existing resources of the Marine Corps, Osprey, C-130 cargo and refuelers, and Marines from fast teams, and put them together in 2 locations on the outside the continent of Africa that could respond almost immediately, wheels up, fully loaded, able to self-deploy in less than 45 minutes. So there is an answer for Benghazi if we believe we're threatened or under attack that is far greater than the assets that were available on September 11th. And that's what Marines do. And I'm proud to serve as an old Army guy on the largest Marine base in America, Camp Pendleton. So we do have an answer. The question really is not what the military would do, it's will the military be allowed to do it? And that's a big part of what our Benghazi investigation is looking to make sure. A trigger must be able to be pulled in a matter of seconds. It must be able to be pulled accurately, aimed at the right target, and it must be virtually automatic if American lives are a threat anywhere in the world. That didn't exist on September 11th when Hillary Clinton and Leon Panetta, the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, were faced with this problem at more or less 9 o'clock Benghazi time. They didn't react. The military was not energized and able to be deployed. I was in Stuttgart at AFRICOM headquarters. They made it very clear that any calls they made were unofficial calls. They never got a go order to do anything for our men trapped in Benghazi, both at the consulate and at the annex. There are two questions that remain, and there are two questions that lead to the president but may never get to the president. Why is it Hillary Clinton didn't ask for and get support by Leon Panetta from the military? We need to get to that. We need to find out from Secretary Clinton why in the world you wouldn't have insisted that they be moving and providing support. Secondly, why is it that Secretary Clinton, as a chief of a large bureaucracy, was not aware that our wall had been blown up twice in Benghazi, that attacks had killed British and caused the British and all other Western flags to leave Benghazi, and yet our flag was still the one Western flag flying there after these attempted breachings. Why she wasn't aware of it, why she was planning on coming in December to announce that Benghazi was going to be a permanent consulate, and candidly, why one of her ambassadors falsely said on 5 different appearances that it was a video when Senator Feinstein, a senior senator from California in the Select Intelligence Committee, this is a Democrat, has made it clear that it wasn't a video and that they knew it was never a video. So I said last night, we've already gotten to the bottom of Benghazi. We've gotten to the failures on the ground. We've gotten to some of the assets that were not properly prepared to react automatically. And particularly I'm proud in the case of the Marines, they're positioned to react better if this were to happen again. What we haven't done is gotten to the top of it. We haven't gotten to why is it the people at the very top that were confirmed by the Senate for this very type of decision, which is Clinton, Panetta, and the President, didn't react. And that's what we will get to. And I think we owe it to, obviously to Stevens, to Doherty, Smith, and so on. And we will get there. But thank you for your service. You're the youngest. I'll take you, sir. You may not be the youngest, but everyone's young to me these days.
You touched on the question before last, but for what you were going off about Congress being able to take a scalpel, and it sort of seems that with what you were saying, you're just increasing the legislative power to check the executive power. I mean, maybe I could have misinterpreted it, but just sort of let you go into a little
No,
more.
it's a good point, and that would be a shortcut to what I'm saying. Article 1 was created assuming that all powers were really vested in the legislature to make laws. They never envisioned, if you will, rulemaking, and they wouldn't have envisioned, for example, CO2 being determined to be a pollutant, one of the most plentiful parts of our atmosphere, by an agency based on an authority of a law passed 50 years ago. They would have said, well, wait a second here, Congress has to decide that. That's not something some agency does, and yet that happens every day, constantly. So what we're really saying is that when a new rule, which is a law, is being created, Congress, which has the exclusive right to create laws, which has essentially acquiesced to the executive branch a vast amount of this authority, has to have the ability to say not that we don't like a law, but that the law is not consistent. A new regulation or executive order is not consistent with existing laws. That's not a new power of the legislature, it's a presumed power of the legislature. All laws shall be created by Congress. One of the problems is that in the case of the line item veto, the Supreme Court ruled, and I happen to be one of these people who will never shake my finger at the Supreme Court. My assumption is that for better or worse, they interpret the Constitution and their decision is final. They've determined that Congress can't have a veto. So the question is, can we have oversight and can we have the ability, the standing, is the way lawyers would put it, the standing to go to the courts and say something is inconsistent with the law. And the reason Congress needs that standing, and I think for many people who are very frustrated, is you need that, that scalpel, but you need it to be used quickly. When a law waits for somebody to claim they've been harmed by a new regulation, wipes out ranchers in Montana, and then they go in saying this law wiped me out, and 4 years later you get a court decision that says, you know what, you're right. There's irreparable harm. Even if you can pay somebody money, you can't put their ranch back, you can't put their lives back, you can't pay them for the 5 years of uncertainty. Congress having the standing to get to the court expeditiously is consistent with what the founders would have said had they ever envisioned a legislative executive branch. So I'm not asking for any new power. Transparency was presumed, and we would like to find ways to get it. And there's bills you can look up, the Data Act, for example, to simply require government to organize data so that it's machine searchable, so that you can get the information or I can get the information to know what government's doing. That's not a new power, that's transparency. Being able to go to the courts quicker is not a new power, but it's a tool that will protect the American people by getting a decision with less time, less uncertainty, which is what you want. You want laws to be final as soon as possible. I want laws to be consistent with the Constitution and with statute, if they're regulations, sooner. And for all of us who see executive orders often as completely inconsistent with the law, we want to have a president who, when he does them, has to ask the question, will I be affirmed in the courts or will I be overturned? And if the answer is I'm going to be overturned, then we'd like him not to do that. Yes, ma'am.
Why not do it in a shorter way? By the way, thank you so much for taking these questions. Section 203 of the recent budget bill not only suspended FOIA, it also gave identity thieves free rein for about 3 years to rob us blind. So why is it so hard to repeal a bad piece of legislation like that?
First of all, it's a great question. The answer is we should never pass laws that go on in perpetuity unless we really believe that they are effectively as permanent as the Constitution. The need to have reauthorization for laws that include a suspension of all regulations that were propagated from those laws unless affirmed would take care of the problem. Because at that point, those who do not want, who see error, have the upper hand, which is I won't vote for it, therefore it will cease to exist. One of the problems we have with reauthorization is normally it is a process of amending laws and getting a president to agree to them rather than truly an up or down. It all goes away unless we do only what we need to do. Your point's exactly right. I've gone through this with the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was rushed through. We acquiesced to the president, and I served on judiciary at the time, and I'm going to take just a moment of personal privilege. I should never have voted for the Patriot Act. But I was a freshman, an Arab American, and a little concerned about how it would be viewed in spite of my military service. In committee, we had a series of amendments that took away from George W. Bush some of what he asked for, most of which, by the way, were just wants and needs of the FBI and other agencies. They'd wanted it for years. This was just their chance to pile it all in. Then Chairman Sensenbrenner, much more of a libertarian than many members of Congress, had worked with people like Barney Frank and others, the ACLU and the NRA. I always say we were literally at the table. Imagine those two at the table together. And we'd worked out a series of amendments. The Patriot Act passed out of judiciary unanimously, but it passed out with a series of amendments. The Bush administration went to the Speaker of the House and said, no, we need them all back in. It appeared on the floor with everything back in, and we were dared to vote against patriotism. And, you know, if I had to do it again as an Arab American freshman right after September 11th, I probably would still vote for it. But if I could be where I am today in my career and look and say, do we deserve better than this? I would have voted no. And that's an example where no matter how many times the Patriot Act comes up, we never get it as right as we would have gotten it that day with Republicans and Democrats, the NRA and the ACLU unanimously supporting a much thinner, more limited response to a terrorist attack on our nation. But your point is extremely good. Yes, since you've been my bodyguard, I've got to be with you.
Earlier you kind of touched upon the federal government's role in funding higher education. The way I see it is it's kind of following the same way as the housing bubble was. We're just kind of giving money out to kids and not all of them have the way of paying it back. What do you think the federal government's role should be in funding higher education?
That's a great one, and it's a complex one. Because the real problem is not the attempt to create college loans or even Pell Grants to help with education. That's sort of like many other gifts where you say, well, this is a good thing, and you forget that what we've done is we've created irresponsibility at the university level. Universities have gone up in cost, and I know I'm sitting there to find one, but they've gone up in cost faster than inflation. What's your major, if I can ask? Accounting. That's good. I'm a business major. Now, whether it's GAAP accounting, there's been small changes, but basic accounting hasn't changed other than you don't use Fiden machines with a big arm anymore the way you did in my day. Accounting is something that could have been put into an automated computer system of teaching a generation ago, and it wouldn't be much different today. The nuns at a little Catholic college that I attended as one of my universities, Siena Heights in Adrian, Michigan. For any of you that want to go to a really good little Dominican college, it's a good little Dominican college. I know the knuckles, they over time get better. You have an example of something that should have gotten cheaper, or certainly shouldn't have gotten more expensive the cost of inflation, and yet it did. So the answer really is, don't fund inefficiency. Don't fund things that are getting more expensive than inflation. Fund efficiency. If the federal government had really cared about higher education, we would have been funding entire online concepts that would have given to people the ability to get college programs, education and testing that would cost nothing, that would represent 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years of your degree, recognizing that not everything has to be interactive with a professor. Now, that's a radical thought, except if what you want to do is drive up the rate of education, drive down the cost, that's what the government could be involved in. Just the opposite, what we've been doing is chasing an ever more expensive cost of education, some of which has to do with professors making more while teaching less. Universities being involved in various excursions into research, some of it federally directed, but all of it costing you in tuition, even though it is not part of what you're in college to get, at least on an undergraduate level. So the real answer is, should the federal government invest in efficiency? Dwight David Eisenhower had one of the greatest investments in efficiency the world has ever known, which is tying together our interstate highway system to make it the envy of the world in his day. That's a federal role of commerce where he partnered with the states, offered them money in order to tie together a network that wasn't well tied together. We could do the same thing in education, but simply taking over private sector loans hasn't proven to do anything but drive up the cost. And, you know, I know in this front row, you know, you probably are thinking, what is my debt going to be and how am I going to pay it back? I will tell you there's an attack on private education, what they call for-profit today. The administration wants to apply a rule, again, a rule, that says that that private education or for-profit education, like Phoenix and others, have to show a benefit in income post-graduation that justify the loans. Now the problem is, not-for-profit can't pass that test, but they want to apply it to for-profit. As a matter of fact, Michelle and Barack Obama, if you look at their income versus the cost of their educations, if they'd had to pay for them rather than scholarships, they couldn't pass that test. So fairly, the federal government being fair and an honest broker and looking for who delivers great education at an affordable price, yeah, we could be part of it, but we're not. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering why Democrats and Republicans, or Democrats and Republicans first and Americans second. At this point, it is obvious that Obama has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, and you know, the Republican Party played a game to impeach Bill Clinton for a marital affair when Obama has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, which in our Constitution gives the sole authority of the Congress to try him through indictment and then throw him out if they find his indictment true. And at this point, it doesn't seem reasonable that Republicans play party politics for an election campaign versus actually saving the United States from the destruction that is not only happening, but is going to happen even faster and at a faster rate with the bail-in and the bailout policy that had begun in 2007 and then increased in 2010. And now is hitting not only Europe, but the United States also.
Well, nobody could be more critical of my own party than I am. There's a lot of things we should do more of and do better. There's a lot of things we should stay out of. When I first came, I remember trying to get rid of the ethanol subsidy and discovering the Speaker of the House had some very large ethanol facilities in his district, and realizing how hopeless that was after a few efforts. Politics does play a part in many things. In this case, I wasn't there for William Jefferson Clinton's impeachment. My understanding is the articles of impeachment had to do with a false statement under oath. And
Well, they've done plenty of those.
no, he hasn't taken any under oath statements. But having said that, the record in the case of President Clinton is going to be written the way you said it, not the actual articles of the indictment. And so I think you have to deal with the politics of it became all about his personal indiscretions, which he lied about, not about his coming before a jurisdiction and lying. He lost his law license over that, so there was a day of reckoning, if you will, in a small way. The president's abuse of discretion is something that I think is awful. If impeachment were a regular tool, our Constitution would be in tatters.
And the founding fathers disagree with me on that. They said every generation there would probably be one impeachment.
Well, Jefferson also thought that the Second Amendment was a necessary tool of the inevitable overthrow of a government, too. And I'm not saying these people were necessarily wrong. I'm saying that I have to deal with the tools that we have today, just as you have to, all of you have to get your education today and pay what you have to pay and move on with your lives and then make the changes you can make when you're in a position to do it. I'm in a position to create tools that will rein in small abuses that fall far below the president. Your mention of his abuse of executive power is something we could have a very long debate on.
He does have a pen and a phone, so
Yes.
he can write anything you want.
But there are abuses by people like Lois Lerner at the IRS. There are rulemaking authority going on by Gina McCarthy at the EPA. There are abuses at cabinet and sub-cabinet levels every day. And there is no surgical tool to hold government accountable. Now, there's a lot of folks in the back rows that haven't asked any questions, but I will tell you, every day my district office and every congressional district office receives sometimes dozens of specific examples of abuse of power, specific examples of a misinterpretation of a rule, using a rule in a way that's inconsistent with the law, but very hard to hold accountable. And more importantly, you have to spend your personal money hoping that you can get justice, which can cost millions because government has unlimited dollars to fight you. So I'm proposing in New Hampshire that government have the ability within government to arbitrate your concerns that a law has been misused, misinterpreted, or a rule has been created that is inconsistent with the law. Again, this president I campaigned against, not once but twice. I believe this president is dangerous to our democracy. I believe that ever since he shook his finger at the Supreme Court, sitting there as invited guest of the House in the well of the House, and decided that he knew more of how Citizens United should have been decided and the question of free speech than they did. That was a defining moment for me, that this president really felt he was different and had supreme ability. So no one could agree with you more that this is a president who is inherently dangerous.
That's what it sounds like hitting.
I famously said on Rush Limbaugh that this was going to be one of the most corrupt administrations in history. And at that time I was called to task. Nobody has re-asked that question of me lately.
Last question.
Okay, who's going to be the lucky? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to ask a two-part question. My name's Ryan McCusker. Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course.
First, I'd say, is it your expectation that the Obama administration's sponsorship of these opposition groups in the Ukraine, which are comprised mostly of Nazi groupings, is a implicit declaration of war against Russia? And also, do you anticipate that the bailout process of Wall Street, which has, during the Obama administration, has been concurrent with a lack of investment in infrastructure, manufacturing, and an overall decrease in production, and overall increase in the in unemployment in the United States, is requiring of you that you pass the Glass-Steagall Act, which you've endorsed in statements before, and that you lead the Congress in the impeachment of this president to prevent the United States being taken into a war, which
that may be the second last question. Let me sort of try to answer the two questions. I'll take the second one briefly first. I lobbied against and succeeded once and failed once to stop TARP, to stop what looks like a bailout of Wall Street, but ultimately those monies have been used in indiscriminate ways for all kinds of uses, and continue to be sort of funny money getting used by this administration. The biggest bailout under TARP and non-TARP money has been Freddie and Fannie. These quasi-banks, these huge entities with trillions of dollars of mortgages on their books that we continue to bail out. For the most part, the money that we've loaned to banks, right or wrong, was repaid. But we shouldn't have loaned it to them. We could have underwritten the bank's essential worth and not gotten into that. And that's what we would have intended to do with national banks. So I'm big against the bailouts, and I want to make sure we learn from the lesson of TARP and the stimulus, because we follow where the money went and how it was misused. Including the Chrysler Fiat sale, which now is unwinding. I knew the president wasn't smart when he told me about the great technology Fiat had. I've been in the car business too long to not know better than that. But the other part of your question, which is more explicit and narrow, I was just I've been in Ukraine, but I was just at Auschwitz, outside of Krakow, Poland. And as you see what Putin is doing in reasserting the old Soviet Union, the question isn't, is the president backing the wrong people? The question is, what are we doing to maintain what was for a while free people in what used to be the Soviet Union and its satellites? And the answer is the president doesn't have a plan. fuel, particularly natural gas, is an effective weapon in addition to money, and Putin is using that weapon every day. And as somebody who was a Cold War warrior, who was trained in the 70s that we were going to go through along the Czech border through the Fulda Gap, and that was going to be the next war, as it had been since the end of World War II, I know that we're cobbling back together an evil empire under Putin, and I'm deeply concerned. So, can I answer the specifics of what the strategy should be in one country? The strategy should be in all the countries who want to have freedom from Russia and the influence, that we provide a viable alternative to their fuel as a weapon. And that goes all the way through the stands, it goes all the way through Azerbaijan, and it certainly goes along all the way to Germany. Germany today has shut down its nukes. Well, that sounds like a great idea. We've shut down our nukes. Great. But where are they getting their fuel from? They are more and more dependent on the Eastern Bloc at a time in which we have the ability to become a net exporter of natural gas and oil. And I say to everybody, it's not just about Kyoto and global warming. Our decision should be about whether or not us using oil and natural gas as a strategic liberator of people's dependence on Russia should be a policy. And that's the policy that if this president really saw Putin as the evil man that he is, and that what's going on, Georgia, Ukraine, and the like, that he, and Belarus and others, he could be on the other side of it. And that's what concerns me. It's what concerns the Poles. It was 10 degrees at Auschwitz when we stood there for 4 hours. It was the 69th commemoration of the liberation of the death camp. And at 10 degrees, you understand why the Poles are concerned about where they get their natural gas from, and whether or not that could be shut off if they don't live up to the expectations of Putin. One last question up front, something a little lighter. Yes, ma'am.
Knowing what you know now, what is one piece of advice that you give to any kid in college?
Get the degree. You know, my college years were all about getting my commission. I was on an Army ROTC scholarship. And when I look back and say, what was the best thing that I got? It was by accident. I studied under Simunek, who had been Dubček's economic advisor before the Russians came over the Czech border and took Czechoslovakia out of what was becoming a renaissance of freedom there. It was an accident. I was going to be an Army officer. I thought, why not take Russian and Soviet communist economics? Again, a lot more accounting, but I took some economics. And by accident, I studied under this man who explained to me why the Soviet system, why government control, although necessary for effectiveness, is always awful for efficiency. And it's part of the reason that not only am I a Republican, but that I realize the danger of government handling anything more than it needs to. But it was an accident. It was an accident to take this course, and it changed my life. Try to figure out in the courses you take in college where that accident is for your life, no matter what your degree is. Look through all the opportunities, and particularly the things you can't get by just reading a book. The professor whose skill and talent and insight can change your view of something for your life, no matter what you do. If you look for that, no matter what your degree is, you'll probably find it. And like I say, I found mine by accident, but I'm still very happy that I had a better understanding of the eventual fall of the Soviet Union. And I know what's wrong in our country when we try to have central control of healthcare, or we try to have central control of banking. Inevitably, we can be effective in the military with central control, but we'll never be efficient. We need to be efficient in everything we can be efficient in. And I learned that from a man who was trying to do that for Czechoslovakia, because he wanted his people to be prosperous at a time in which the Soviet Union was telling them more central control, more long-term planning, more figuring out where you build plants for social good. Plants for social good was Soviet Union's mistake. Projects for social good is becoming our mistake. And so I'm sort of sharing my politics along with that. I know they're going to give me the hook. I want to thank all of you. Hopefully the one thing that you take away from this is asking presidential candidates to do the job they do well, and leaving to the private sector with oversight with transparency, that which the private sector could do more efficiently is important. And I'll close with just one thing. I only get that? That's good.
Absolutely.
The last night I got maple syrup, and now I got to check my luggage. I really believe that New Hampshire has a unique opportunity because the questions you ask for over the next 2 years could shape the debate for Republican and Democratic candidates for whether they understand that the private sector has solutions because the private sector can fail. And the public sector never has to deal with failure. Therefore, when healthcare.gov is poorly executed, they're not going to reform how they do those things as easily as they're simply going to double down with your dollars. If you ask those questions, you could change what the next administration is like. Thank you.